I'm Melissa Salrin. I'm here with Rachael Woody, and I'm here with Darcey Fugman Small and Rick Small of Woodward Canyon. Today is July 14th, 2014. So thank you for meeting with us today. And the first question is, why wine?
Well, I have to tell you that I discovered wine, I think, when I was traveling in Europe after I got out of college, and was exposed to wine then, and the vineyards I saw, and I noticed that trees and some of the other plant material was very similar to Walla Walla, and when I got back, that kind of thing kind of started to go through my head that it might be possible here.
Okay. And so I mean, sometimes winemakers seek out particular regions to establish wineries, and then other times there are different paths. And so, I mean, can you speak a little bit about your connection to the Walla Walla Valley? I know you have a long-standing one.
Well, yes, I do have a long relationship here, and I'm generationally involved in agriculture. So on my mother's side of the family, I'm the 5th generation in agriculture in this valley, and then on my father's side, I'm 3 generations in agriculture. So farming, and we predominantly wheat and cattle before we explored the possibility of a vineyard, and then trying to learn to make wine from those grapes was just a very exciting thing for me to do as a young person. So I really enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, your degree was in agriculture. And
yes.
And then you decided to plant some grapes. And what did your family think about that?
Well, I'm not sure what my family thought. I'm assuming they thought it was interesting to explore. Uh-huh. But a lot of the neighbors and other people around the valley thought I was an absolute raving lunatic. And so, but the beautiful part about having a dream like that is that sometimes you're just so occupied with it and so consumed that you don't really pay much attention to the outside banter or the people, and what they say or whatever. It didn't matter. I just was convinced I was going to do this, and so we just did it.
Did it take a while, Darcey, for you to be convinced about this, or were you in, at the very beginning?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. Our second date, we bottled his homemade Chardonnay. So I knew what I was getting into. I figured that's why I was hired, was because I could work the bottle. And I also saw the vineyard when it was just planted, and it was really the first 7 rows were of Chardonnay were sticks in milk cartons with screen over the top to keep the grasshoppers out. And I stayed. So I guess that means something.
Well, I know you're not formally trained as winemakers. So can you speak a little bit about the research and how you became so successful at this? What did you do to learn about the things you needed to know?
Well, I don't know. What you say is true. We didn't have formal training, but I mean, you couldn't practice medicine that way or be an engineer probably or something like that. But winemaking is very intuitive, and it's natural, and it's not that complicated actually. And so the good thing was that there were some very, very good universities in our country, UC Davis and Cal State Fresno, that had great programs, and they had bookstores, and all you had to do was you didn't have Google or anything to do a search, but you could write a letter and get information, and then find out what books that the different programs were using. And so I just bought the textbooks and had them shipped up from UC Davis, and started reading them over and over and over, and that's how I did it.
And there was a very small industry starting in the Tri-Cities area, and they were very welcoming. Yes, and we did a lot of blind tastings together. Some of our first equipment came from Preston Wine Cellars. So they were excited that anybody was interested in the subject, and so that was really helpful too, having this little nucleus of people that were all kind of headed the same direction.
Okay. Well, so I know you're kind of anticipating the next question then about some of the other early winemakers in the region. Who were some of the other people that you worked closely with?
Well, Gary Figgins and I were very good friends, and we were in the Army Reserve together. And actually, Gary and my brother Jim were better friends while they were in high school. And then when I was still at Washington State University, joined the Army Reserve, and then that's how I really met Gary. And so when he was starting to share his enthusiasm for home winemaking, I was very much intrigued with that. And actually his home wines were superb. They were really, really good. And I remember tasting one of his homemade wines, and it just tasted like pure fruit. And I thought, boy, if someone can make a wine that captures the flavor of Walla Walla fruit like that, that's something I really want to learn to do. And so we hung out a lot, got to be very, very good friends, and are still. But he was making homemade wine, and it was good.
And you've always been this close to Lake Cole, right? I mean,
yes.
So Baker and Jean Ferguson of Lake Cole.
Sure.
I mean, did it feel like there was a real nucleus of people in Walla Walla who were very aware of what everyone else was doing and very supportive, or did it feel? I mean, because I'm just trying to think of how it is now. It seems like everybody is.
Yes.
Hey, I want to have a wine.
Oh yeah, and a lot of people coming from other places. I mean, that was the thing that was pretty special about being next door to Lacole, was that Baker and Jean were very, very good neighbors, and oftentimes if Baker or Jean needed some help, I'd go over and help them, or vice versa. And you have to remember that we were only about 3 or 4 of us here in the early days, and then it grew a little bit more, but we needed each other. We depended on each other, because you just couldn't go run down to the local supplier and get some yeast or get some other input that you might have needed for wine. So we helped each other quite a bit, and it just seemed logical to do it.
And the two of you, your partnership, I mean, are there particular roles, Darcey, that you play, or was there anything that you wouldn't do? Or, you're out there doing whatever needs to be done.
Yeah, in the beginning, I would do the vineyard. When Rick was still working part-time with the family farm, on weekends, I'd be up in the vineyard suckering the vines and working the vines on Saturdays until we had our children. And, I've always gone to the events and poured wine, always helped at Crush. So been part of that whole side of it. And then now, as a general manager, I'm kind of overseeing the non-production things, the tasting room, the restaurant, all that part of the information, website and everything, with the rest of our staff. Whereas Rick's on the production side of the business, which is really, the winemaking and vineyard growing side.
But to be fair, to Darcey's credit, she did a lot. When we first got started, I mean, the things that she took care of, was made the difference between what I could do. So I could have never done it without her helping and being involved. But yeah, she'd help do market visits, and just as recently as last fall, we're coming back through London, and Darcey's out on the street working the market just the same as me. And and it's good that way, because she knows everything. I mean, she knows everything about the company. Yeah. So that's good, though. I mean, that's good. That's the kind of general manager you need.
Right. Well, I know you were both very involved in the Walla Walla Valley Wine Growers Association, which is the precursor to the Walla Walla Valley Wine Alliance.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about getting the appellation approved. I mean, I know you, Darcey, wrote the report, or wrote the application with Becky Hendricks. Right?
Yes.
So how did that process evolve?
I can't even really remember how we decided that it was time to work on an appellation. I think Yakima was just going through the process of theirs when we started, and I don't know if it was initiated. I can't remember if it was us or with Gary, or with Walt Gary, who was the county extension agent at the time, that provided a place to meet and with really a lot of resources. But once we decided we were going to move forward, since I was a land use planner, writing that and doing the legal description was something that made sense for me to do. So I did all the research on the Washington side, and then Becky, who was, at that point, their family were co-owners of Seven Hills Vineyard, the original Seven Hills Vineyard. And so she did the Oregon side, and then we put it together and sent it off to the feds. Rick was president of the associate at the time, so his signature's on the letter, and it went off, and it was a 2-year process. It was, again, before you could just email somebody something, and so we had letters back and forth, and we went through like 4 different ATF agents in the process, and one gentleman lost all the maps, and so we had to resend all the maps again. But eventually we got it finished, and In fact, I remember that it was Jim Ficaretta was the
Yeah, I
gentleman's
remember.
name at TT
Yep.
or ATF that actually signed off on it and helped us get through the process. And then not long after that, the Columbia Valley started their process as well.
Okay.
But it was a good exercise to do, and I'm trying to still remind myself about why we chose to do it then. But I know Herb was interested. Herb Hendricks, who, along with Jim McClellan, were the owners of Seven Hills in the beginning, and Herb, as a doctor, just was a very methodical guy. So was Jim. But I know I had conversations with Herb, and I knew Herb felt that it was important to begin in that process, as did I. And I think we all agreed that Walla Walla had a good name, and we were already known for other kinds of agriculture, good onions and good other things. And so and it was better to do it early than to wait and just wait. And by initiating that, I think it brought more credibility to our place and gave us a branding of sorts, which we still rely on heavily today.
Yeah, and the first approval did not include anything north of Highway 12, like where Seven Hills, not Seven Hills, Spring Valley is.
Oh, okay.
And that was there was no discussion that it wasn't really naturally part of the valley, but there was no wineries or vineyards there at the time.
Oh, okay.
And then later on, after Spring Valley got established, Norma Kibben and Chris Figgins both prepared an amendment to put it back to what the original application was. But it was, I mean, the valley has always been a pretty well defined space too. And so it was fairly easy to get agreement and to move forward, and it made the process much simpler.
Do other people come to you and like at the time the Walla Walla Valley Wine Growers Association because they wanted to do similar things in their own regions? Or, I mean, just in terms of people asking, how did you do this? How did you succeed at establishing this and like that whole long process? I mean, that would take a lot of time and energy and perseverance.
Yes, yeah.
Well, most people hire consultants to do it now.
Oh, okay.
And there are people who do specific things like that, but there were guidelines. I mean, it wasn't that difficult if you could read and understand what to do. I mean, it wasn't hard for you to do that.
No, and I can say because the valley had such a long history and was so well defined as an actual region, physically, it was very helpful. And the long history that Walla Walla had with growing things. There was articles we pulled from the early version of, I think it was a Walla Walla Statesman or something. It was prior to the Union Bulletin.
Right.
And there were articles in there like 1800s about growing the potential to grow grapes in Walla Walla that would outpace what was happening in California. So it was pretty amazing to go back and have that resource to use as justification for why this should be approved as an appellation.
Yeah, and in fact, I believe a lot of those items we were able to source out of the archives at Whitman, weren't we?
We do. We have through Larry Dodd, actually.
With Larry Dodd.
yeah.
Larry
Yes.
Dodd helped us with that, which is almost a wonderful thing to think about, because that's how, with some of that wonderful information, it was how we were able to more easily get through the process of becoming an appellation because of the history we have here.
Right, nice circle.
Yeah, it made a very nice circle. Yeah.
So I know that the Walla Walla Community College Enology and Viticulture program, I know that you're on the advisory committee for that. Can you say a little bit about how that program, I mean, how having these kinds of things has really shaped and changed, the industry here in Walla Walla?
Well, yeah, it's good. It's good for it to be here. I mean, I think it's just one more part of how serious we are as a wine region. Clearly, in the beginning, obviously, we didn't have that, and hence you send it out to a university that has a program, and you try to borrow their textbooks and learn that way. But the wonderful thing about having the Center for Viticulture and Enology here in Walla Walla is that it's technical, but it's also very practical. And that's the thing that I liked so much. If someone wants to take it even further after Walla Walla, they have the choice of going to Davis or go to OSU or Washington State University, or if they choose to go into take a different direction towards research, they would probably want to go to one of those universities. But I think it just makes Walla Walla more complete. It gives us more credibility, And it's also about learning the techniques and the winemaking right here with the grapes that you're working with, and not learning California techniques at Davis and then coming back and trying to apply those to making wine in Walla Walla. And so it's important that it's here.
Okay. I know that you're a member of the Walla Walla Valley Wine Growers Sustainable Trust, and I wanted to just ask you, I mean, I think, especially for Woodward Canyon, you have a farm, you have the restaurant, I mean, it all seems very much tied to this idea of sustainability. And is that, how long has that impulse been a part of Walla Walla Valley?
I'd say about 10 years. Don't you think? About since we first started? I think our first meetings happened in about 2004, maybe 2005. So I'd say about 10 years. But I have to give a lot of credit to Jean-Francois, who was exposed to IOBC and sustainable wine growing in Switzerland as a youngster, and then when he came to the United States and was working in California, he got more involved in sustainable wine growing and viticulture. And so when he finally came to Pepperbridge, he, I believe, was the one that drove the initiation of us becoming and focusing on sustainable agriculture as far as grape growing and winemaking here. And he's also led by example. He's been incredible that way. And I think now, I think the last numbers I'm aware of is that we are somewhere in the neighborhood of about 70% of the total acreage in Walla Walla Valley is either certified sustainable already or in the process of becoming certified sustainable. So that's quite a large amount of acreage that is farmed sustainably, and so we're very proud of that.
Yeah, that is.
And a lot of us were using those techniques earlier, but there was really no way to capture or to measure it, and that this process has provided that.
Now, I know you have 2 children, and your daughter is now back working here. I mean, how was it something that, were they always, like helping out growing up, or I mean, is it something that you feel, because I just think about family and how that seems really important, being from the region, having this long legacy of agriculture, and so, what can you say something about that kind of like legacy that you're passing on?
I think we always told them they should do what they want to do and what they love, and so there was never pressure to be part of the winery. They both spent time out here, particularly our daughter. Our son did it mostly. He was up doing video games, but she started hauling glasses at events and doing things like that. And over the years, just picking up a few extra things that she was doing. When she went to college down at Lewis and Clark in Portland, her intent was not to do wine. She studied international affairs. And then after she got out of college, she came back to just kind of spend a relaxing summer in Walla Walla and just kind of got slowly sucked into the business. She worked for the Wine Alliance a little bit, doing some part-time things, and then she worked doing helping with a study the community college did on the economic impact of the wine industry. So because they needed someone who kind of knew everyone in the industry, and she did, so she helped on that. And then she kind of ended up back at the Wine Alliance for a while, and pretty soon she was set that she was going to stay in Walla Walla and get into wine, and so she worked at Tertullian, their tasting room and sales, and then at Long Shadows for 5 years doing their lab and quality control. So it's been a really interesting transition to see it happen, and this is what she wants to do. So it's been wonderful to have her here. And our son sits on the board. He's not here in Walla Walla, but he's a cook, and so he's gone through the culinary program, and not here, but in Seattle, and so he brings that side of the business into it, which is really nice.
That's great. Now, I feel like I remember, Darcey, talking to you at your house and you mentioning that you would have students from France come, and this is something that you did for over 10 years? How
I don't know, probably closer to 20, close between 15 and 20, I suppose. And so our kids grew up with a lot of exposure, I guess, to other parts of France, at least, and which we love. And we loved that part of it. And this is a very interesting college where it was like a graduate school, and it was actually a private university in Toulouse. And it was an interesting group. These kids were all required to do an internship between 2 and 4 months time abroad, and so a lot of them chose Washington State, and so we had this wonderful opportunity. Every year a new student would help pick the next student that would come, and so it just continually generated a new student every time, and they were and we're still in touch with some. We've been invited to their weddings, and so the exchange like that about wine and food and all of that, cultural as well, is just fascinating stuff. And I think it was good for us, but it was good for our production team as well, and good for our children.
Mm-hmm. And then we had 3 longer-term experienced international students that were here between a year and 18 months. Yeah. So we really got to know them quite well, and that was, again, part of just a great experience. And I think we're in touch with all 3 of those students still.
But you're saying that the students from this program in Toulouse were aware of Washington. I mean, it's not, oh, why am I in Eastern Washington? Where they already had that knowledge.
Well, most of them know about California. They know about Napa and Sonoma. But what I think they didn't know so much about was Willamette Valley and Walla Walla Valley and the things that were going on here. And for some just didn't want to go to California. They knew about California already, and they wanted to go somewhere else. And of course, they had a lot of other choices as well. They didn't have to just go to America. They could have also gone to Germany and work, or they could have gone to Australia.
Well, they had to.
Or New Zealand.
Also, they had to do one domestic and one international stage. But it was interesting because most of these students were not interested particularly in wine. They were anything from people who were going to breed cattle to garlic family who raised the rose garlic in Lautrec, or marketing, agricultural marketing or agricultural engineering. But they had to also not only go abroad somewhere, but they had to do something still in agriculture, but outside of their discipline too, which was a really great broadening experience for them as well.
Well, it was almost like an agricultural Whitman College, if you want to think about it that way, because these people it was very liberal, and in the sense that you were doing all these things that were associated with agriculture, but it was very, very broad and complex, and so there was a lot of learning that went on with it. It was just fascinating.
Great. Well, so I know I kind of already anticipated this, but that's what I do. So I know you were established, bonded in 1981. So how would you characterize the changes that you've seen in the wine industry in Walla Walla since that time? Oh gosh.
Well, I think probably the thing that I see that's the biggest now is so much more interest from outside. I mean, Walla Walla for a long, long time, Walla Walla grape growing and winemaking was a very compact, small little, I don't want to call it a secret, but it was pretty tightly held. I mean, there weren't a lot of people that knew that much about it. And I think as the wines, we started to produce more wine, and the quality was always very high. And then there became an awareness of Walla Walla's wine quality and its commitment, I would say, to excellence in production of wine and growing grapes. And it started to entice people, I think, to take a look at, maybe if they were serious about wine, maybe look in California certainly, or maybe in McMinnville or Woodinville, or anywhere else down in the Willamette Valley, or they would take a look at Washington State. And of course, when you start thinking about Washington State, the areas where we grow grapes in Walla Walla is a beautiful place. It's just aesthetically a very pleasing place to be. And I think when they came and saw that, and I think it's escalated, it's just built on itself, and then there becomes critical mass and more and more and more go. And that's just my take on it, but I don't see that slowing down either.
I mean, does Walla Walla feel very different than when you were growing up in this region? I mean,
sure.
Yeah.
Well, Walla Walla's been an interesting place, and I had the great privilege. I was just telling someone else this the other day. When I was at university, I was in architecture school, and I was in a landscape architecture class. And my professor asked us to do a developmental history of Walla Walla. And of course, having access to Whitman College, it was fabulous. But one of the things that I found, and this has probably happened in Walla Walla's history as near as I can tell about 4 or 5 times, that Walla Walla was well educated and traveled substantially. And so people knew they knew things. And I think Walla Walla had the ability to kind of reinvent itself or take another look at agriculture or whatever. It's been a mining town. It was a town for agriculture, and now it's kind of known as a wine town. And I just think that people had insight here. And what's fascinating is every time they did it, it revitalized Walla Walla. And the wine industry part of this, for me, is nothing more than an extension of that social capital that Walla Walla has always had. And it just continues. It's wonderful.
And I think part of that's due to, if you want to call it isolation. I mean,
Right.
because we are not on a main road to anywhere, but I think that also is what keeps that real strong sense of place. And I think for the wine industry particularly, if you're in Yakima Valley, for instance, is the center of that, is it Yakima? Is it Prosser? Is it, where is that center? In Walla Walla, it's always been clear from the beginning. The center of winemaking and all the activity around it is Walla Walla. And I think that's been very helpful for us as an industry. And I think that's one reason it's really attractive to our visitors that come here.
Yeah. Well said. Okay. Well, I think I will pass you off. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Do you guys need a minute? Or are you okay to keep?
I'm good.
Yeah.
All right. Rose.
And we just talk a lot.
Yeah.
It's good though, it's very natural, very articulate. I was eavesdropping in the room,
Oh.
so it was a pleasure to hear it. All right, so my portion is going to be focused on Oregon and Washington, and of course the Walla Walla ABA is cross-state, and so to get started though, I would love to hear more about the Walla Walla region and what it's known for. I know you both sort of touched on the agricultural history first, and I'd love to hear more about that and what sort of agriculture was here and how that evolved into grapes.
Well, I obviously, I don't know if I'm the expert on this to speak, but Walla Walla, at least from my point of view and from the generations that I was involved in with my family on both sides, was mostly wheat and cattle. And that, I believe, is a lot what Walla Walla, the soil here was good, and we had good rainfall. And then I never was associated with some of the fruit, the tree fruit. I never was exposed to that. But I know that peas were grown here widely earlier on. And it's just a great place to grow things. The soil is good here. Very, very good, actually. Darcy, you have anything more to add?
No, I just think, when the peas and the other row crops were here, there were a lot of canneries and that type of thing. And then as people's eating habits changed, where, people aren't eating so much out of cans and things, so those kind of went to the wayside, and then there was something else that would come along, and it was just, I think it's the way farmers have to react to the marketplace, and that's why we've seen a lot of the changes over time.
And so for you both, I know you're one of the first in the area. Has the transition to vineyards been slow and steady? Has it been just in the last 5 to 10 years? What has it seemed like?
Well, I think it was kind of slow initially. I can remember having this conversation with Gary Figgins, I don't know, it's been 20 years ago now or so, but he and I both believed, after we could see the kind of grapes we could grow and the style of wines we were able to produce, and we knew they were pretty good, and we'd won awards, and especially Gary had won some marvelous awards, and we'd done well also. And what kind of was baffling to us is we knew it was a really good place to grow grapes, and we couldn't figure out why no one else had figured that out yet. And part of it was because we were not making very much wine, and the wine was being consumed mostly in Washington and Oregon, I suppose, maybe a little bit more. But as that changed, and more awareness built, then more more people took a look at it. And then it started to grow. I would say probably for me, the next step after when we started in the late 70s for Gary and early 80s for us was about 1995. Because then we had about 2 or 3 other wineries that started, and I think Dunham and Reiniger and Walla Walla Vineyard, or some in that general zone right there. And that kind of set the next start. And then I think after that, then I think people started to take a look at it more. And we were building critical mass.
And I think one thing too is we had all started primarily though using fruit from outside of the valley. Almost all the wineries here in the early years, because we were just planting vineyards at the same time, and so we weren't getting that amount of fruit. And I think that continues to this day, and for several reasons. One is because of the winters we have in Washington, that people use fruit from outside the valley and continue to, and some is just for the character you get from blending these different vineyards together. But I think the other vineyard-wise here in Walla Walla, probably the biggest thing was when Norma Kimmon came and started Pepper Bridge, because that was a significant investment in vineyard, and then moved on to the new Seven Hills on the Oregon side. But that was, I think, really the turning point in terms of people from the outside area really looking at Walla Walla as a place to come and to plant vineyards.
Well, I would also add that those vineyards that Norm was planting and becoming associated with were large, larger than he would have needed to just supply his own winery at that time. And so what that meant was that then there was going to be Pepper Bridge grapes available to other people, like Chris Camarda from Andrew Will, or several other wineries from over in the Puget Sound, or from another place. And so that kind of started to build a reputation also for Walla Walla grapes, and all of that was good, and it just grew from there.
So we've talked about the Walla Walla area. Because there's not the split of the river, I guess to give you some background first, I just did Hood River and the Dells, and then Dallas Port and White Salmon too, of course. And so the Columbia was a very defining border as far as the topography and climate being different on either side. For the Walla Walla AVA, the Columbia is not cutting through it. So for places like Milton Freewater, is it pretty much the same sort of soil and climate, or is it different?
No, I'd say Walla Walla Valley, you have to remember, if you go back far enough, we were really Oregon before we were Washington. We were Oregon territory, and the Walla Walla Valley was just this wonderful little drainage that came out of the Blue Mountains. And, we didn't, Washington was territory, but I mean, we were totally, for me, the fact that there's a political boundary that kind of runs right along on an east-west basis, if you want, or west-east, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have any meaning to me at all, because what we're talking about, as Darcey spoke to earlier, was a sense of place, a spot, a piece of ground or earth that has these cobbles in the bottoms, and we have windblown silt over flood silts and fractured basalt, and that's kind of our place. And it's the same, more or less. I mean, there's some geological differences, but the point is that it really is not very different on the Oregon side or the Washington side. And so it's just Walla Walla Valley. We like that.
Yeah, I think to the wine industry, there really isn't. It's the valley. I mean, that's kind of all we talk about it as a whole. We really don't really talk about. I think, from the few wineries that have tried to operate, maybe in Oregon, there's been some differences in terms of how you can market. Because most of us are in Washington in terms of the wineries, and so we market through the Washington Wine Commission. Well, when Seven Hills Winery was over the border, they couldn't, and yet they were part of the valley, and they were certainly part of all of us. And so I think there's been some, but it's more because the politics, not because of the geography that separates it.
Well, and there are some rules. There are rules about labeling. It's just they're federal rules, and then we each have state rules too. So Oregon has state rule, Washington has state rule, and so sometimes those aren't. They go against the federal a little bit. So you have to comply with your Oregon rule if you're in Oregon, and you have to comply with Washington rule if you're in Washington. And unfortunately, if you're using Walla Walla fruit from the Oregon side, that can kind of get you into a spot where you have to be sure, if you're going to be technically correct, that you're labeling absolutely properly. So that has caused a little bit of an issue, and I don't know that yet if that will ever be resolved. It would be, thankfully it's nice if you can just label it as Walla Walla Valley, because then it's just from here. But we're even noticing now some little subsets, little sub-appellations, if you will. But we always knew that they were there. And so now we're starting to see some of that start to surface as Walla Walla becomes a little bigger and we know more. We've had decades now of planting grapes in different locations, and we're starting to see that.
So we've started to get into this, and it leads great into the next question as far as what are the strengths and the challenges. So it sounds like Walla Walla Valley as an identity is a huge strength, and then of course the challenges being the politics and the federal and state laws. What are some other things that have been either really great and has lended strength or critical mass, and what are other things like the labeling that is sort of is something to overcome?
Well, I think one challenge, and it's regardless of where you are in Washington State, is the whole issue of availability of water. And if you're going to plant a vineyard, you need, unless you're way up in the foothills, you need water. And there are no new water rights in the state of Washington, so you either have to acquire land with those water rights or you have to be able to transfer a water right. And that, as time goes on, is going to be, I think, a more and more critical thing that will affect the expansion of vineyards in the Walla Walla area.
Well, yeah, I would even add that I think we will see some of those same kind of regulations come up in Oregon as well. I think, the two states have so much in common. I mean, we just are so, it's like almost like siblings of one kind or another. And there's just so much that we do that's the same. But I know Oregon is also concerned about managing its water resources efficiently and effectively. And I just think in this particular case, Department of Ecology of Washington State just was a little bit further ahead of it, but there's no doubt about it that water, I mean, we see it in California now all over the place, that a lot of the producers of fine wine grapes in Sonoma and Napa are, and all of a sudden people who are best of friends and best of neighbors just across the road from each other or across the creek from each other are now just fighting for the water. And it's going to be, the water will be a huge challenge going forward, for us. That probably won't be the only one ever, but managing vineyards sustainably over time is admirable. But even still, sometimes that gets a little bit challenging, and I'm kind of going through some of that right now. I love being sustainable, and I love being even closer to organic when I can do it. But just generally, and you can throw climate change into that mix, I think, if you want, because you're starting to see that play in to what's affecting bees and pollinators, and also what sometimes happens with your beneficials then, that you rely on a certain population of beneficials to remain sustainable, because they're there, and if things are changing, and then the beneficial population changes, and then that means a predator that comes into your vineyard doesn't have something eating it, so then it starts to cause you more trouble. So there's a few things like that I think we'll still be faced with, but it's nothing that we can't manage.
And I think the positive is just, the community we have here in Walla Walla. And there's still, we have the mix of the arts and the education and, just wonderful things happening. And now, a lot of small producers producing very high quality food. And I just think that's, there's a great synergy going on here in the community. And if anything, it's increasing, which I think bodes well for the wine industry, and particularly for bringing people to the valley that enjoy spending time here. And that's really important, I think, for all of us.
Yes, one thing I am starting to learn of this area is for the wine industry coming in, it's really helped the Walla Walla area. It increased tourism, increased economy. I'm sure you found that to be the case too. Yeah,
the restaurants, I think one thing with wine industry, and this was pretty common in California too, and around Napa and Sonoma, when their industries first took off in the 60s and 70s, a lot of those winemakers down there lamented the fact they didn't have enough good restaurants. They had the wineries, and now, I mean, it's the same in McMinnville and elsewhere. I mean, you've got all these wonderful little restaurants, and they're offering locally sourced food, and it's literally farm to table types of meals, and they're just extraordinary. And that's what you see in the premier wine regions in Europe. It's just the same thing. It's wonderful.
And I think the very nice thing is it is actually bringing and keeping younger people back to Walla Walla. It's been really refreshing. The number of people that work for us that were not from Walla Walla, but they have been interested in what's happening, and so I think we have access to some really great individuals, and they bring something to the community as well.
Yes.
Which has been really nice to see.
Yep,
that wasn't the case when I came to Walla Walla.
Yeah.
So leading off of that, where do you think this will go? Not only for the wine industry, but for the Walla Walla community. How do you see it growing?
Well, I believe, I'm sure it's going to grow. And I think one of the things that I always have said, and this is actually in fact how I met Darcey, was that I was on a planning commission for a while and she was staff, and we met that way. But one of the things that I feel strongly about is if our industry is going to grow, and it will, then we are responsible as participants to help shape that growth and help be involved in it and be respectful of it. And I learned that from Darcey, but it's true. I mean, this is really important, and that way it grows, it's sustainable, but it also grows responsibly. So you're socially responsible, and you got to do things in the right way. And I really think, I think it's open-ended how grand the wine industry can be here. It's hard for me to guess. I want all the people who come to embrace that concept of helping shape the growth, though, because we've got corporate jet aircraft coming in and out because they fly over our house a lot. And it's just different. There's a lot of people coming here. So some people will come to Walla Walla just because they want to have a winery, but the people that come to Walla Walla that I want to know are people who want to help make Walla Walla better and invest something in it, and then stay also.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think we'll continue at. I don't think we're going to see any great spikes. I think maybe we're kind of past that that we saw like between '99 and 2000. But I think there'll be a slow, steady growth. And there's this last 2 years, there's been more interest from people from outside of Washington, larger winery corporations, and I think we'll probably consider. We'll see more of that, and we'll see more of the small mom and pop. I think both ends of the spectrum will be growing. But I think that interest from the outside is going to maybe make some changes we can't quite envision yet.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Now, you may not have an answer to this question, but to tie in Oregon again into this growth, one thing, of course, that we have observed is that Walla Walla in Washington is really coming into its own with the restaurants and the arts. Milton Freewater is not quite there yet. Do you think that will change? Is there things that you can perceive as wine industry members as to why that growth may not have happened as much? Any thoughts you have on that, I would appreciate.
I don't know, I almost would defer to you on that. You probably are better at land use planning and all of that, but...
I think that's been part of the issue. I mean, I think, Walla Walla was a much larger city, and I think so a lot of things that might have in days past located in Milton Freewater have located in Walla Walla. I think Milton Freewater, I think if they get on the track, I think it will expand and grow, and maybe have some really nice things happening down there as well. But I think right now it's still more advantageous for wineries to be in Washington than in Oregon. So I'm not sure how much unless something new of a substantial size happens in Oregon winery-wise, you'll see a lot of growth, as much growth on the Oregon side for wineries. But I think the community certainly there's beginnings, and I think they can build on that.
Great, thank you. So one of the questions that I love asking wine industry people, and especially for yourselves who have been in this area for a couple decades now at least, what are some of the best varietals that you have found that thrive here?
Well, we're still exploring that, I think, a little bit. At least I am. That said, they're, whether they're German or Italian or Spanish or French, I think we don't know exactly all of that yet, but for us, for personally where we are, given the warmth of the valley, at least on the western end, where we are, I would still say Bordeaux varieties are probably what we, certainly what we have the most planted. But we're dabbling in rootstock now and clones and different exposures and aspects. But boy, there's, I think as Kevin Polk says, there's a lot of possibilities because Walla Walla Appalachian is as large as it is, relatively, that there's a lot of microclimates out there for a lot of different grapes. And what's interesting is how well they can do. So that's not a cop-out, but I think for us, I would say Bordeaux variety is predominantly for us. Yeah, we do some other things, I think, quite well too. And that's just out here. So I don't know that if you go to other places, there'd be someone else would give you certainly a different answer, I think.
So what have been sort of lessons learned? Or if you had something to do over again, would you do differently? That kind of thing.
I don't think I'd do anything differently. I mean, you can't. I mean, how could you do that? I mean, this was just a dream anyway. It was just one of these wonderful things that I've told people that have interviewed me before that failure was never part of the dream. It was just kind of like one of these little things that you just knew you were going to do it, and you just set about doing it, and you did. And I think what happens is now, as you get older and you have more experience and you have more hindsight, you know more about what kind of risks are out there and what are out there. When you're young and passionate and so focused, a lot of that other stuff on the side, on the periphery, you just don't pay attention to it. You're oblivious to it, and you're just going, and you just want to make it happen. I think for me, as I've gotten older, then I realized that there is more risk. You have weather, you have issues, you have winter freeze sometimes that happens, and so some of that sort of stuff is things that I think about more. But boy, when I started, I was just going to do it. I just didn't, wasn't going to.
Yeah, the only thing that might have been nice to have a little more background in business, because neither one of us really did. And I think now maybe strategically we could have done things a little differently, but it's been okay. And I think we've surrounded ourselves with people that know, that can fill that in, and we're learning. But that was probably, and I think that is the one thing that most people getting in the business don't have, honestly, is they don't have that background in business, which would certainly be helpful.
Well, in marketing too. I mean, one of the things is they kind of go hand in hand, and understanding economics and a lot of that as well. But the wine business is a very expensive business to be in and to get into, because like our accountant always likes to tell us, you're sitting, once you're doing Bordeaux Reds, let's say, or Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot, it's not unrealistic at all to have 3 vintage of those wines in different stages, from starting in October when you have the new vintage in, and you've got one that's in the barrel, and then you've got another one that's in the barrel or just in the bottle. But in any event, you've got between 3 and 4 vintages sitting around, so you've got a lot of money tied up. And so you need to have probably deeper pockets than you think you do to get in the business. And as I'll always tell people, that making the wine is the most fun. Growing the grapes is the most fun in the world, but the most important thing is selling your wine. Getting it sold, and getting it sold properly to the right stores, the right wine shops, the right restaurants, and then have subsequent purchase orders. That's the biggest deal for me right now. And the thing I stay awake most now thinking about is just making sure you can do everything you can marketing-wise and with sales. And it means being on an airplane. It means traveling and being out quite a bit. Never take it for granted, ever, ever.
Good, that's excellent advice.
Yeah.
So I think the only other question that we have for you is, between Melissa and myself, is there anything that we should have asked you that we didn't, or any sort of last thoughts you want to make sure we capture looking at the wine industry?
I don't know, the only thing I would say in addition is how, at least from my point of view, how tight we are here in Walla Walla.
I was just thinking the exact same thing. I mean, the camaraderie thing that we talk about, that's not just
BS.
Yeah, it's
the real deal.
It's real.
Yeah.
And we are good friends with, the majority of the folks that are in the industry, and we support each other and help each other out.
Yeah, we socialize. And I think it's hard for people to understand how you could have that kind of a relationship with a competitor, quote unquote, a competitor. but they're friends. I mean, we helped each other when we were coming up in this together. And I think that's the thing that I probably, of all the things in the wine business in Walla Walla that I love, I think that one is magical because you just have these great friends around you and they're great people. And when they do well, you're happy for that.
Yeah.
Go
No, I
ahead.
agree. And that's maybe one thing we always, like, we hope that the new people coming in understand that history, because that is what really, I think, helps set Walla Walla apart and has kind of made it what it is.
Yeah, and a lot of the people who are here, though, were all grounded here. I mean, a lot of the early people were from here. And so they understood that. They understood that Walla Walla social capital thing. That I don't know. I think that will be one of the things going long term, will be rather the newer groups of people, of investors, of people who choose to develop a winery and plant vineyards here, will embrace that same kind of commitment to staying together. And certainly when you get to be 100, 150 wineries, it certainly becomes harder to know everybody. I mean, certainly I don't know all the new people now. I saw a truck going down the road the other day with a name on that I never seen before. So, I mean, and they've got a vineyard, and they've got a little truck and it's got their name on, and I didn't know, and I don't even know where they are. They could be in Oregon or Washington. Well, they're in Washington because they have a Washington license plate. So,
but majority-wise, though, I think there is still that feeling, and that's
I agree.
I think that's one reason the Wine Alliance is so strong, and I just think that that's a huge part of what's happening here and will continue to happen.
Good.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you both so much
You're welcome.
for this interview.